class, and welcome to EdVantage. I'm Marie Huntsinger, and today we're discussing sociological theories around crime and deviance. So the first theory we're going to talk about is this concept called medicalization of deviance. Medicalization is a term or process of making deviance a medical issue and treating it as such, as an illness or a disorder. So examples of previous issues or social phenomena that was once just a social issue that's now a medical issue would be things like addiction and alcoholism, autism, and even mental illness. So before, where people would just be seen as social outcasts, now we have diagnoses and treatment for it. So what are the pros and cons of medicalization? Because there are pros and cons. So pro would be that it legitimizes the issue or the disorder and shifts the blame away from the individual's moral feelings into a underlying illness or disorder. However, a con could be that it shifts away focus from social structural issues and it takes away agency from the individual. The second theory we're going to be discussing is called functionalism, and we talked about this way back in one of the first videos that we filmed. So functionalists, remember, believe that society all works together in order to create social stability. So how could deviant behavior or actions or attitudes be functional, you may ask? Well, functionalists argue that deviant behavior helps society with a few different things. The first is it solidifies social boundaries. So in order to know how to behave in society, we have to know how not to behave. And we do this by public shaming. For example, back in the 19th century, we would have stocks, which were metal or wood devices with arm or leg holes that people would be put into when they committed a deviant act, and the public could walk by and throw rotten tomatoes, and that would remind everyone else in the village that if you steal a loaf of bread or whatever you did, you would be publicly humiliated. A more modern version of this would be mugshots that are posted online for the world to see. Also, gossip is a form of social shaming. For example, being gossiped about around the water cooler at the office redefines boundaries for the rest of the office. So if you're caught, stealing pens and someone gossips about you, then that signals to the rest of the employees that stealing pens is a deviant behavior and should be avoided. Deviance also serves to promote group unity. So for example, September 11th, 2001 was a horrific act of terror that took away many precious lives. However, during this time, we really saw the people of the United States put away a lot of their political differences and in-group, out-group tensions to come together and be patriotic and unify against a common enemy and a common cause. Also, deviance promotes social change. So if you look at important social movements across history, for example, the Civil Rights Movement, oftentimes it was stemmed by an act of defiance or deviance. For example, Rosa Parks refusing to move to the back of the bus would be an act of deviance that actually stemmed social change. So once people in society start looking at a deviant act as not so bad, the majority of people start to accept this deviant act as normal or okay, then that's when we start to see social change occur in society. The next theory we're going to talk about is called differential association theory, and this is a symbolic interactionist theory coined by Edward Sutherland. And this theory suggests that we learn to be deviant from significant others in our life, like our friends and our family. And so if you think about processes like gang initiations, for example, you have to learn the cultural norms of the deviant group or organized crime families, right? And in those contexts, acting, within the purview of the dominant culture might actually be seen as deviant in those particular subcultures. If you think about peer pressure or bad influences, people learning to be deviant from the significant others in their life. The next theory we're going to talk about is called labeling theory, and this theory suggests that no inherent acts are deviant. It's the label that society places on those deviant acts that makes them deviant. And so if you label someone as a troublemaker, for example, a child, and you start treating her as a troublemaker, perhaps sending her to detention or suspending her or expelling her, this kind of creates a cycle of deviance where the person starts to accept this identity and might, a self-fulfilling prophecy, might conform to it. Another example could be the label of ex-con. Now, when someone has served their time in prison and is released back in society, they often have this label that follows them around as they are looking to reintegrate back into society that can prevent them from finding legitimate jobs if an employer doesn't want to hire them because of this past record. And so they may not be able to find legitimate job opportunities and go back into a life of crime. Social disorganization theory looks more at the environment or the social structure. So this suggests that crime is likelier to occur in neighborhoods where there's not a lot of legitimate job or educational opportunities, there's poor school funding, teacher burnout, not a lot of parental supervision, and decaying infrastructure. What goes along with this is Merton's strain theory, which says that everyone in society is socialized to want these cultural goals that we're told to obtain. For example, in the United States, we're socialized to want certain things like a nice house, a nice car, nice jewelry, nice clothes, material items. And if you're in a circumstance or a situation where you're not able to obtain these cultural goals through legitimate means, through working a 9-to-5 job, for example, then you may turn to crime in order to achieve these goals. And Merton called this, a nice term for this is innovators. So they innovate by finding deviant acts like stealing or robbery in order to obtain these cultural goals. Social control theory is a theory that suggests that people who are very integrated into society, meaning that they have strong connections to society, are less likely to perform deviant acts compared to people who have less to lose, so to speak. So examples of social integration include having a job, having a family, a marriage or children, having a college degree, belonging to religious or community organizations. So if you have all of these institutions in society to keep you accountable, you're less likely to resort to crime or deviance. However, if you take someone who perhaps loses their marriage, loses their kids, loses their job, does not have an education or is not in school, does not belong to any religious organizations or clubs, they might feel very isolated from society, and they might turn to things like drug use or alcoholism or even to a life of crime because they feel like they don't really have a lot to lose. Conflict theory, we talked about this in one of the first videos, and they're concerned with the inequalities between the rich and the poor. So for conflict theorists, and when we describe the criminal justice system, they're focused on inequalities based on class, and often race and gender. So conflict theorists suggest that the upper class have means in order to hide their deviant behavior, or they can hire fancy lawyers to help them make a good defense, or they can have offshore accounts to hide secret accounts and money, or they can get sent to very fancy rehab centers on the beach that cost $500,000, whereas low-income people don't have the same luxury. So conflict theorists suggest that rich people in society receive less harsh sentences, are arrested less often, so they don't have as much police surveillance on their communities. And when they are arrested, they receive less harsh sentences compared to low-income people. Really good example of this was a few years ago. Ethan Couch was a 16-year-old wealthy teen who ended up driving drunk and killing 4 innocent people. And he was very rich and privileged, and so the defense used this very controversial defense at the time called affluenza. And the defense attorney argued that because Ethan was so rich and so privileged, that he didn't understand the consequences of his actions, therefore he should not be held accountable. And because of this defense, it actually worked, and he got only a 10-year probation sentence for killing 4 people. And unfortunately, he wasn't able to abide by his probation. He broke his probation by drinking at a party, and it was caught on film. And he fled to Mexico with his mother. Eventually, he was recovered, and I believe he's now serving some jail sentence time for that. But you can imagine how much of the public was outraged at this decision, and it really exemplifies the conflict theory. And the final concept I'm going to talk to you about is what we call social stigma. Social stigma is any label that associates people with unfavorable or disapproved behavior or characteristics. And social stigma can exist in a few different ways. It could be a stigma of how you look, for example, a burn victim or being very obese. It could be an identity trait, for example, belonging to a certain religion or a certain race, or it could be a character trait, for example, mental illness or addiction, being perceived as weak. So those are the concepts that I have to discuss with you today. Thank you for watching, and next video we're going to be talking about crime and criminology. Thanks.